Thank you, worship team. Yes, go ahead and clap. Did we all survive El Nino? I have not. How have we got this much rain in the last 15, 20 years? It's the most bizarre thing. And then when we moved to the preserve, we didn't know that it was essentially an island when it rains. And all the streets closed down, and I have to bring out a kayak or something to get out of there. It's insane. It's like, what's going to happen when we move down there and we have church and it rains? It's going to be really interesting. But anyways, let me start us off this morning with some quotes. As soon as you're satisfied with God alone, He'll bring someone special into your life, as though God's blessings are ever earned by our contentment. You're too picky, as though God is frustrated by our fickle whims and needs broader parameters in which to work. As a single, you can commit yourself wholeheartedly to the Lord's work, as though God requires emotional martyrs to do His work, of which marriage must be no part. And here's probably my favorite right here. Before you can marry someone wonderful, the Lord has to make you someone wonderful, as though God grants marriage as a second blessing to the satisfactorily sanctified. So writes Paige Benton Brown as she talks about singleness. And she lists a number of popular explanations that the church gives for singleness, to try to explain singleness. You're too picky, God needs to work on you before you get married, blah, 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 blah. Now, I haven't been single for 4.5 years, but I can totally relate to those popular four comments and questions. I remember during college and post-college, I was in my 20s and I was a part of the church, and I know all too well the common stigma and questions that comes with being single in the church. It seemed like every Sunday I would get the, "Hey Mark, are you dating anyone? Hey, who's that girl with you?" "Yeah, that's my sister." Right? It's like, come on people, relax. "Hey, have you gone to Jared's yet to get the ring? Hey, Mark, when are you going to, settle down and start your life?" Right? Those are the questions I was asked.
What is supposed to mean, if you don't mind to ask you?
Well, we'll save that for later, Alana. But these are the questions I was asked. And what's interesting is even when I was in seminary, which is grad school for pastors, and honestly, I was actually entirely nervous and scared about even being able to land a full-time pastoral job. And the reason was because during most of seminary, I was still single. And so honestly, through my mind, I'm thinking about how in the world is a church going to hire me as a single? Are they going to think that I'm going to be able to relate to families, to married couples? And so I was actually really scared. People just have this tendency in the church to think really weird of you if you're not married. And so I know many other people have dealt with this, either currently or in the process of dealing with this. It's been my experience that I think the American church does a great job at treating singles as though they're on the JV team. Right? And it's kind of this notion that well, you're not normal, you're not like us, because see, we're all married, we're all part of the varsity team. And so singleness is kind of like the plan B of the Christian life. And the assumption, I think, underlining all of that is, hey, when are you going to kind of grow up, settle down, and get married so that you can start your life? So we've been going through 1 Corinthians, if you've been with us the last month or so. Last week, we had quite an adventurous Sunday. We talked about sex. A lot of you weren't here, and I'm just saying it's the first time I talk on sex. You're not here. I'm not sure what that means, but that's okay. It's on the website. We video record everything, which is awesome, so check that out. But Paul, what he's doing here is, as he transitions into chapter 7, he just got done talking about sex and marriage life, and he transitions now into singleness. And I just want to say this morning from the get-go that perhaps you are here this morning, and most of us in this room are married. And so you're going to be tempted, oh, wow, this is about singleness. I can just kind of zone out. I can think about what sport game is going on later today or what we're having for lunch because, this is only for the singles. And so I just want to tell you right away, that's not true. The issue of singleness actually affects our entire church. One of the things we're going to see this morning is that actually marriage is not about marriage, and singleness is not about singleness. John Mark Comer, one of my favorite pastors up in Oregon, he says this: life doesn't start when you get married. It starts the second that you fold your story into the larger kingdom and follow Jesus forward. Yes, Parker. Amen. Hallelujah. That's my little boy right there. So, 1 Corinthians, we're talking about singleness. I think this is actually going to boil down to an issue that affects everyone in this room, whether you are single or married. So let's hop right in. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. You know the drill from now. If you have a Bible, go ahead and open it. Feel free to use your iPhone. We'll have it on the screen behind me. Last week we ended at 1 Corinthians 7:5. We're going to pick up verse 7, and like I said, Paul's just got done talking about marriage and about that sex is actually created by God, designed by God. It's a good thing, and it should be part of your marriage. He says this in verse 7, I wish that all of you were as I am. Paul's single. But each of you has your own gift from God. One has this gift, singleness, another has that, referring to marriage. Now to the unmarried and the widows I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried, as I do. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion. Let's just stop right there. I want to make two very clear points this morning that you just can't miss. One, Paul says singleness is good. Singleness is good. He says, verse 7, he says it's good. He says, I wish you were as I am. And thirdly, he calls it a gift. Paul calls singleness a gift. So right away, what we need to do is debunk the whole cultural stigma of the church that singleness is something less than marriage. JV team, plan B. Paul says, no, it's a gift. In fact, he says later on in the passage, I actually prefer it over being marriage. Just radical claims here. What's even more radical about this is that in the first century Greco-Roman world of which Paul and Jesus lived in, it was a Mediterranean culture dominated by family. Family was everything. So here are a couple examples. Caesar Augustus at that time had actually issued a law that if you were a widow, you had 2 years to remarry, otherwise he would fine you. Jewish culture, if a man died with no children, he was considered cursed by God. Right? And so, this is fascinating because children stood for, here's what children stood for in the first century: your security, your future, your honor, your legacy. And so if you were a mom or a dad, you wanted to get married so that you could have kids, and you wanted to have kids so that you had a future. Meaning this: there were no retirement plans back then, no Social Security, no Roth IRAs, no pensions. And so you kind of needed children to pass on everything you had. And furthermore, when you got to old age, who was supposed to take care of you? Your children. And so, family was like the number one value in the first century because it stood for your honor, your legacy, your security. If someone didn't have kids, that was negatively frowned upon. And so if you didn't get married, that was like a step worse. What's wrong with you? Why would you not get married? And so this is fascinating because if you look at the early church and you look at Christianity, the founder of Christianity himself, Jesus, was single. What about the second most famous leader of the early church, Paul, who writes this? Paul was single. So here you have this early multiplying movement of the first century that its top two leaders, its founder, and then its biggest proclaimer are single in a predominantly married culture. That was actually really weird. And then scholars tell us, historians tell us, that actually the early church, and this is fascinating to me, was the first movement ever in the history of the world to actually promote singleness. So not only did the early church say, hey, it's good to be single, like you can live a viable life with that. No, but they actually went one step further and they said, actually, the better way to live is to be single. And so for the first 1,500 years of the church, singleness, celibacy, was actually looked upon as the best way to live. It wasn't until you got to the Protestant Reformation that it switched. And the church today is still, unfortunately, under the stigma that singleness is just kind of a plan B thing. Second point you got to know that I want to be clear on is that Paul's also very clear that, hey, there's nothing wrong with marriage. Like Paul's not down on marriage. He very clearly says he doesn't think marriage is sinful. He doesn't think it's bad. He thinks it's good and there's beautiful things that happen in it. So Paul's not saying singleness is the way to go, therefore you can't get married. That's not what he's saying. Really what Paul's saying is that actually both singleness and marriage are a gift. Now, that doesn't mean, when we say that it's a gift, that if you're single, that you're gonna love it. I just wanna be real this morning. All right? So just because he says singleness is a gift doesn't mean that if you have that gift, you're gonna love it. But here's the thing, vice versa. There are a lot of people statistically who are married and hate it. Honestly. So there may be people who are married that have the gift of marriage, but they wish that they didn't. Listen to this quote. I'm going to quote John Mark again. He says this: "You may want the gift, but not have the gift. You may have the gift, but not want the gift. You may have the gift for a time, but not forever. Or you may be widowed or divorced and get the gift later on in life." So here's kind of the question. What does Paul mean by gift? What does he mean that singleness is a gift and that marriage is a gift? I think he probably means something like this: that God gives it to you as a gift and that he gives you his power, his presence for you to live out this unique calling on your life. By saying singleness is a gift, he's saying, hey, I'm going to equip you, I'm going to be with you, I'm going to be beside you and allow you to walk this season, or maybe it's your whole life, in a really positive, kingdom-advancing way. Here's the other thing about gifts. Every single one of us in here has a gift. Right? Every single one of us. Some of us has multiple gifts. So for me, I would say my gift is teaching. Now, what does this mean, though? Does this mean that teaching is really easy for me? Does this mean that it's actually a lot of fun and that I enjoy it and all I want to do is teach? No, honestly, I can honestly tell you that probably the hardest thing for me every week is to form a sermon. So I would say it's my gift, but it's actually incredibly difficult and hard. And there are some times where I honestly don't want to do this right now. Maybe you're in here and let's say your gift is playing the piano. If you're a gifted piano player and that's your gift, does that mean that you're going to want to practice every day and that it's going to be a complete joy for you? No, there are going to be times where you don't want to play the piano, you're sick and tired of it, or you know that you have to keep practicing every day to continue to hone your craft. So I think in some ways we have to re-examine what we think of gifts. When God gives us the gift of singleness or the gift of marriage, what he's saying is that I'm giving you my power and my presence so that you can live out my calling on your life in this season. Singleness and marriage are a gift. Okay, so why does Paul call singleness a gift? Here's where we get into the meat of his argument. So let's continue. 1 Corinthians 7, we're going to skip down to verse 25. Paul gets in his reasoning behind why he thinks singleness is a gift. Verse 25, now about virgins. Virgins in this context were young women who were engaged, or as they said, betrothed. And so they hadn't quite yet been married officially. They were still kind of single, if you will. He says, I have no command from the Lord, but I give a judgment as one who by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. Paul's giving his personal advice here. He's saying, hey, you know what? This didn't come directly from God, but still listen to me. This is good advice. Here's his first reason why he advocates for singleness, verse 26. Because of the present crisis, I think that it is good for a man to remain as he is. Scholars debate, okay, what is this crisis that Paul's talking about? Most think, and this would be my position on it, is that there's a famine going on in southern Greece. There's a wheat shortage. So if you're married and you have a family and you have kids, it's going to be hard to feed them because there's not that much wheat left. So there's a present crisis. Verse 27, are you pledged to a woman? Do not seek to be released. Are you free from such a commitment? Do not look for a wife. But if you do marry, and he's clear here, you have not sinned. And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. Paul's not down on marriage. This is funny. But those who marry will face many troubles in this life. And I want to spare you this. Right? I mean, it's just kind of one of those moments in the Bible where you're just like, wow, this is so honest. And you're just like, thank you, Paul, for those encouraging words. That's where I take couples for premarital counseling. We just go right there, and I just tell them, hey, you're going to face many troubles in this life, so make sure you want to move on. I'm kidding, but I'm not. Moving on. What I mean, brothers and sisters, and here he goes. The time is short. From now on, those who have wives should live as if they do not. Those who mourn as if they did not. Those who are happy as if they were not. Those who buy something as if it were not theirs to keep. Those who use the things of the world as if not engrossed in them. For this world, in its present form, is passing away. And I want to pause there. This phrase, this world is passing away, is notoriously very difficult to interpret. Let me shed some insight on this. In the first century world, if you were a good Jewish person, Jesus, Paul, so on, you understood history in two stages, and that's it. Stage one or stage two. Here's what I mean. Stage one was called the current age or the present age. Stage two, the age to come, the future. Okay? That's it. They viewed history in just one of those two stages. So the current age, the present age, what we're in now is, what is it? Well, it's marked by sin and evil and injustice, natural disasters, right? Not a bunch of good things. That's the current age. That's what we're in now. A Jewish person knew that there was coming a time in the future, stage 2, when the age to come would happen. And at that point, God would send his Messiah, and the Messiah would redeem and restore this whole world. So sin and evil and injustice and natural disasters, all those things would be gone. And the age to come would be here, stage 2. Here's the thing. They thought that transition would happen like at once. Boom, Messiah shows up, and we go into stage 2, okay? Jesus, like he always does, Jesus throws a curveball into this. Because what Jesus does, he comes as the Messiah, and he comes into the middle of the current age, the present age, and he brings life to it, life out of death, freedom and forgiveness from sin. But there's still death. There's still injustice. There's still natural disasters. And so Christians, as followers of Jesus, we live in this tension. We live on the cusp between these two ages. Because on the one hand, we're still in the present age because there's sin, death, evil, injustice. But then on the other hand, the new age is kind of here. There is forgiveness, there is freedom, there is grace, there is love. Jesus is risen from the dead. And so scholars call this the now but the not yet. On the one hand, the kingdom's here. On the other hand, it's not. Here's the point. Paul's saying that the things of this world, the present age, they're passing away. Now, he's not talking about this physical world, rapture theology, all that kind of stuff. I know I'm probably walking on some toes here, but it's not in the Bible. God loves this world. He's going to redeem. He's going to fix it. We're not going to go float in a cloud with a harp in your hand. So it's not that this physical world is passing away, but the evil, the sin in it is going away. So here's Paul's question. He says, in light of this, what reality should you be living for? Should you be living for like the here and the now? The fleeting things that don't really matter in bringing the light of Jesus? You know, like orienting your priorities around like getting more money, making sure we have the nicest car in the neighborhood, making sure that our kids are the best dressed in their class, making sure that we have like a perfect Instagram feed. Paul's like, is that what your life centers around? Or does your life center around living for God's kingdom that is bursting into the present? Are you living for the kingdom that's just around the corner, that God's life is invading this world, that heaven is coming to earth? Or are you living for that? And he says, this absolutely changes the way everything you think, including singleness and marriage. The time's short, like be urgent, don't waste your life. The kingdom's coming, Jesus is available. And so he's like, don't complicate your life. Keep it simple. Don't focus on, getting married, having joy that day, being sad. He even says shopping. Ladies, listen up to that one. All your devotion, all your time, all your energy needs to go to the invading kingdom. And so Paul doesn't mean by this, hear loud and clear. He's not saying, if you're married, you can be a bad husband or you can be a bad wife. That's not what he's saying. But I think what he's saying is, if that is you, make sure that your priorities are right. Don't worry about the things that are going to be passing away, how much money you make, having nice toys, having the best car. Because the kingdom is coming. Like it's here. You have to act with urgency. And so Paul's first reason, here's why he says singleness is a good thing. He says time's of the essence. Jesus' kingdom is coming. And as a single person, you have the unique ability to solely focus on that. You don't have to be worried about all the other distractions going on, all the distractions of marriage. And he says you can solely focus on the life of Jesus being available now. He moves to his second point, which is related. Continue on, verse 32. Here's what he says. I would like you to be free from concern. Okay? An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs, how he can please the Lord. But a married man is concerned about the affairs of this world, how he can please his wife and buy her makeup, essential oils, and clothes from Nordstrom's. Oh, wait, that's not in there. Man, are we awake this morning? Okay. Verse 34, his interests are divided. An unmarried woman or virgin is concerned about the Lord's affairs. Her aim is to be devoted to the Lord in both body and spirit. But a married woman is concerned about the affairs of this world, how she can please her husband. Husbands, we're easy, right? We're easy. It's like, just give me ESPN, and that's it. I'm good to go. I'm easy. Okay, moving on. Okay, good thing Rachel's not sitting right there. Verse 35, I am saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you may live in a right way, and listen to this phrase, in undivided attention to the Lord. Verse 38, so then he who marries the virgin does right, but he who does not marry her does better. That's a bold statement. Paul goes out and says, it's better to be single. Here's Paul's second reason why singleness is good. And this gets to the core of it. Simply put, if you're single, you are able to live in undivided attention to Jesus. As a single person, you are able to live in undivided attention to Jesus and his kingdom. Now, Paul, he's not saying, hey, married people can't do this. Paul's not anti-marriage. He's just saying, hey, the reality is, honestly, if you're married and you have a family, you're going to have a lot of distractions. And he's saying if you're single, you're just going to have less to worry about. He's kind of being radically honest. And I think we do this weird thing in the church where we paint marriage as this really easy, beautiful thing, walk in the park. What's the one popular movie? Something with summer. Okay, my mind's going blank. What is it? Yes. Anyways, that's insider stuff. So, here's what Paul's getting at. Paul's saying, hey, marriage is awesome. It's great. God created it. He created sex to be good and to be great. But he's saying, if you are single, you can live with undivided attention to Jesus and his kingdom. And then the church kind of says, well, marriage is easy. Marriage is actually the way to go. You're only normal if you're married. And then we think of singles as kind of plan B on the JV team. Here I think is the core issue of this whole discussion. And this is what we're going to focus on. I think we, in 2019, think of singleness and marriage in a very different way than Paul did. Here's what I mean. I think that most of us, and maybe we're not even aware of this, think that the point of life with relationships is that you are satisfied with this romantic sexual love. That is the way to fulfillment. What do I mean? Tim Keller says this. In our culture, Western culture, tempts us to put our hopes in apocalyptic romance. There's a phrase for you. In finding the complete spiritual and emotional fulfillment in the perfect mate. Innumerable Disney-style popular cultural narratives begin telling life stories only when two parties are about to find true love. And then once they do, the story fades out. The message is that what matters in life is finding romance in marriage. Everything else is prologue and afterward. I mean, think of Disney movies, Lion King, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, and I just dated myself there in the 90s. But they always have like the sappy love story that ends well and then the movie cuts out. Think about Valentine's Day. We just celebrated this 2 weeks ago or whatever. I mean, Valentine's Day has actually become a huge thing in America. $19 billion are spent every year in Valentine's-related things. $19 billion. And I think the message is, hey, the way to be human, the way to be fully alive, like the best type of humanity is if you're in a romantic, emotional, sexual relationship. That like, that's the way to true love. And it's interesting to me that our culture today says, hey, the way for you to feel happy is to get cheap red roses, a lousy teddy bear, and a sappy Instagram post. Let me be clear. Romantic love is great. It's awesome. If you were here last week, the whole message was about that sex is God-given, God-created. It's beautiful. It's powerful. He created it for a male and a female in a lifelong committed relationship. And it's absolutely amazing. So hallelujah. But it is not the end-all, be-all of being a human made in the image of God. You can be fully human and a thriving and flourishing and blossoming human being without being madly in love. And I think we kind of even cringe when I say that, but I think that's how far Western culture has gone. Marriage is not about marriage. Singleness is not about singleness. Romantic love isn't the point. Let me ask you this. If romantic love was the point of life, what happens with this? So we have the phrase fall in love, and you fall in love, you get married. Well, what happens when you fall out of love? Because if the whole point is when you have that emotional high and you find your perfect mate, and the dopamine is rushing, as we talked about last Sunday, there will come a time when all the butterflies aren't there anymore. So if you make the point to be falling in love and to have that emotional high, what are you going to do when it's not there? Are you just going to get divorced? Well, that's what our culture does, because we've defined fulfillment as falling in love, of being in that romantic, emotional state. Here's what I want to suggest this morning, standing on the shoulders of Paul and Jesus. Singleness and marriage should be ultimately understood as it relates to serving Jesus. Singleness and marriage are not about singleness and marriage. Singleness and marriage are about mission and calling. Singleness and marriage are about you partnering with God to restore this world. And so Paul says it's a gift. So maybe you're like me. I have the gift of marriage, which means this. For whatever reason, Rachel and I, we are better off together for the kingdom. It's not about me and Rachel. We legitimately feel that we are better to be kingdom agents because we're married. We understand our marriage within the scope of God's mission and calling. Now, maybe you're here and you're single, and honestly, you're a better agent for the kingdom being single. You should remain that way then. You can live out of undivided attention. See, and that's the thing. See, we have to frame singleness and marriage as it relates to God's mission to restore this world. So for Rachel and I, our gift is marriage. We're better able to serve Jesus because we're married. For some of you, that may be because you're single. And so we're all different. We have different gifts, different seasons, and that's something that the church should celebrate. So as we close here, I want to spend a couple of minutes talking very practically just to single people first. So if you're in here and you're single, let me start off with this quote. For followers of Jesus, the point of singleness isn't freedom from responsibility, it's freedom for more responsibility. So let me ask you this. If you're single, how do you view your singleness? How do you view it? Meaning, are you wasting your stage of singleness? And you don't know, maybe you'll be single for 6 more months, 20 years, who knows? But for this season right now, how do you view it? Are you wasting your singleness? Because it's a gift. Paul says it's a gift. And if you're here and you just, oh, Mark, I hate you for saying that. I get it. Most of my 20s, I was single. I get it. Honestly. I was that weird guy who wanted to be married in college. I tell some guys that and they're like, dude, what's wrong with you? It's just the way it was. I think I remember being in youth group in high school, and they're having some Q&A about the thing that you were most fearful of, and someone shouted out, not getting married so that I can never have sex. We can say that. That goes through Christians' minds if you're single. I get it. But here's the deal. Years later, as I look back at my single life, I wasted it. Because you know what I was doing? Every time I entered a church or a coffee shop or a sporting event or a concert, all I cared about, all I focused on was, I had the hot babe marriage radar up. And so I was just constantly looking for a girl. And that's all I focused on. And I realize now as I look back, I wasted it. I didn't even see what Jesus was doing right in front of me because I was so focused on finding a girl. I can't have those years back. How do you view your singleness? Do you view it as a gift to serve with undivided attention? Secondly, and I'm very serious here, if and when you get married, if you're single, please, 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 only date and marry a follower of Jesus. Paul says this, verse 39. A woman is bound to her husband as long as he lives. Marriage is for life. But if her husband dies, she's free to marry anyone, but he must belong to the Lord. Now, this isn't God just, being legalistic and putting rules on you. So if we understand singleness and marriage as it relates to living out God's mission, right? If we understand it that way, does it make sense to date and marry a non-Christian? If the whole point of marriage is for you and your wife or your wife and your husband to partner with God to restore the world, if they're not a Christian, there's going to be disagreement there. You guys aren't going to be able to partner together for the kingdom. That's why followers of Jesus shouldn't date or marry a non-follower of Jesus. Because marriage is about partnering together for a gospel witness. And so how can you do that if you're marrying or dating a non-Christian? Let me talk to marrieds here now. If you're married in here, let me ask you this. How do you view singles? How do you treat singles? If you view singles as Paul does, I don't think you'll be constantly asking questions like this. Hey, are you dating anyone? Hey, have you gone to Jared's yet? Hey, Mark, when are you kind of finally going to grow up and find yourself a wife and settle down and start life? And by the way, Christians are really good at saying stuff like that. So if you're laughing, I can honestly tell you, that happens all the time in the church. And you're only asking that way because you view singleness one way. You view it as plan B, and you view it as the JV team with the goal to get married. Paul says singleness is good. Actually, it's better. I think we should ask questions like this instead. If someone's single, say, hey, is there anything in your life that's keeping you back from fully pursuing Jesus? What's distracting you? What is God doing in your life right now? What if we ask singles those questions? Secondly, do you invite singles into your family? Married people have a really easy propensity just to go and hang out with other married people and just double date. And that's great. I'm not bagging on that. But do you hang out with single people? Do you invite single people over to your house just to have dinner? Most single people I know love hanging around babies, even if they're crying and throwing food, pooping, everything else. They're just normal people. Invite a single person over to your house just to hang out with you. That's why single people feel left out, is because we don't do that. I remember the phrase Jesus says. Here's the deal. Jesus says that the church is a family. And it's not defined by biology or marriage, by whether or not you follow Jesus. Our brothers and sisters are just those who follow Jesus. Family is not defined by marriage or biology. So there shouldn't be any discord between marrieds and singles. Lastly, here's what I want to ask you. How can you learn from singles? This is a question I was running through my head the last couple days. If you're married, how can you learn from a single person? Maybe ask yourself, is your marriage your loudest gospel witness? Are you helping to bring in the age to come in your marriage? Just as a single person is supposed to be undivided to the Lord, Paul says elsewhere in Ephesians, he says, do you know what marriage is supposed to be a picture of? When he says two becoming one, the picture is heaven and earth becoming one. He's saying Jesus, God, absolutely loves this world, and he wants to bring his presence and this world to be becoming one. Does your marriage symbolize and offer a foretaste of heaven becoming earth? That's the point of marriage. Marriage is not about marriage, and singleness is not about singleness. So I'm going to invite the music team back up. And as we go into a time of response, we do this every Sunday. And I want to highlight the word response. We are here to respond to what the Spirit of God is doing. So maybe you're here and you're single and you feel lonely and frustrated, and maybe you are even mad at God, and I just want to say, I get it. We would just love to pray for you, to come alongside you and say, hey, singleness can be tough. We want to pray for you. How can we help you with building deep friendships? If you're married and you're here, maybe you need to recommit your marriage to the Lord, that your marriage may be your loudest gospel witness. When people look at you and your wife or you and your husband, do they see Jesus' love for this world? That's the point of marriage. So we're all in different places, but we both need to surrender. We need to surrender our singleness and our marriage to Jesus. And so I'll be available for prayer here on the side. You can stand, you can kneel. and be in a posture like this of saying, Jesus, I want your kingdom life, undivided attention. Let me pray and let's respond.